All right, welcome everyone. Today's video is going to be a head-to-head competition, at least for short-range casting, a little bit long-range casting too, between the new Daiwa Silver Creek AIR TW Stream Custom and the Daiwa Gekkabijin AIR TW PE Special. They're both meant for different applications. This is meant for short-range casting, this is meant for long-range casting. I'm going to see how much overlap there is and which one that you should buy. So keep watching, stay tuned, and don't forget to subscribe. All right, to start off with, I'm going to use the Silver Creek. It's already rigged up. I had some really good, if you didn't watch my overall casting impressions with it, I'll put that link down below. But basically, I just cast a wide variety of lures, a very good casting reel, and actually cast distance pretty well. So I'm going to, this is some mid-range casting here. I'm going to kind of just quickly do some different casts with a variety of lures and then switch over to Gekkabijin. Use the same exact line with both, like the same physical line. And the line I'm using today, it's made by Verivis. It's the Super Trout Advance. It's the Bait Finesse X4 braid. So it's a 4-strand braid, and it's designed to be a little bit better handling on BFS reels versus most high-end braids. It's really worth checking out. It's been doing good so far. I don't have a review for it yet because I haven't caught many fish with it. All right, so to start off with, I have my break setting on 4 out of a possible 20. That's been the comfort range for most lures for me. Although when I'm really light lures, I have to turn it down a little bit. So one thing I like about the Silver Creek is kind of the few times I've used it so far has been its ability to cast flat, which if in these stream settings, not really here because it's a little bit more open, but there are some spots like over here and going down the river a little bit more that there is a lot more brush. I actually cast really nice with this rod too. That is one thing I should say. I'm using the Daiwa Silver Creek AGS. It's a 5'2" light powered rod. It's significantly more backbone than I would normally use for trout, but right now there are some brown trout in here, and there's also burbot running up the rivers too, which is kind of like it's a big freshwater cod. So I will definitely like having that extra backbone. Yeah, casting, I mean, I'm not going to call out every single shot that I'm casting, but I'm able to cast accurately. I'm able to know exactly where I'm casting, and it's very predictable casting. That's because the fixed inductor inside the spool, which I covered in other videos, it does give you a lot of predictability with casting because there's no moving parts for the break. Yeah, I'm going to try to get inside that brush a little bit on my next cast. I actually got inside the brush on that cast. And the lure I'm using today, it's made by Duo. It's the Spearhead Ryuki 50S. It's a pretty staple lure that I use for a lot of my trout fishing testing. It's 4.5 grams, so it's not really lightweight. It's a good starting ground for testing. Yeah, like getting inside that brush, it does feel really nice. It's really weird for being a trout rod. This rod is actually quite stiff, and it's quite fast in action as well. So it's not as like that glass rod that I've been using a lot, that blue rod. It's a lot more forgiving with short range casting. I really do like this rod for a lot of the mid range casting that I'm doing now. It's a fairly long cast. I'd say, I don't know, it's about 25 yards. Yeah, I mean, that was right to the edge of the ice. That was very easy, very controlled. And going short range to long range casting, it is very good with the Silver Creek. I covered that a lot in my other video. I don't want it to be too redundant. But if I want to get distance, it's very easy to get distance with this reel as well. That was the biggest thing that surprised me with my testing. I thought that fixed inductor would take away too much from the braking system. But it actually is quite nice, especially with that glass rod. Sometimes with a faster action rod like this, it's a little bit stiffer too. It flicks the lure out there a little. It doesn't load up that well, except for when you put a little bit more force into your cast like I'm doing now. And sometimes that can be a little bit too much for fixed inductor spools, but it's actually been really nice. All right, so I have the Spearhead Ryuki 50S on the Gekkabijin. One thing to point out that these knobs in Dragstar, they're not stock, but that has no indication of the performance of the reel at all. And something too, before I forget, I will mention price-wise, they're about the same. I know on Digitaka, depending on wherever you look, but I know on Digitaka they're they're really close in price. The Silver Creek just barely more in price, so the price isn't really a factor when it comes to the two reels. They're about the same tier, so I'm not comparing like a Steez to a, you know, like a Tatula or something like that. All right, so I'll set the brake dial down to 4 just so I have a side-by-side comparison. The braking and the brake dial setting should not indicate as performance at all. So don't think that one reel is better just because you can use a lower brake dial setting. Spool tension is barely any side-to-side play. That's a little bit more restrictive with the Gekkabijin, which is to be expected how I used it before in the stream setting with the same lure. Had a different rod on, but I will turn the brakes down. It's easier to get that same distance. Now that's on brake setting 3. And I will say, at least in mine, I know a lot of people said that the Gekkabijin is a really smooth reel, which mine is a very, very smooth. I think it's just as smooth, if not barely smoother than my Conquest BFS, if that has indication of how smooth it is. The Silver Creek is smooth retrieve, but it's not as smooth as the Gekkabijin. Yeah, with this faster action rod, it actually feels better casting the Gekkabijin than when I was using the more moderate rod in the stream, if you've seen that video. I had to turn my brake dial way down to get good performance, but I think with this faster action rod, it kind of flicks my lure out there faster, and it's able to have the braking system work a little bit better. There we go. It feels safer for me, I should say that. It feels safer for me to really just get out there and flick a cast out with the Gekkabijin. The spool weights are about the same, around 8.5 grams, give or take a little bit. So the spool weight isn't a real indication of the casting performance. The braking systems are what's different between the two reels. I'll turn it down to 2. Why not? Ooh, yeah, that went a lot for. I don't even. Oh, it went up on the shore, but I do feel the Gekkabijin, now fishing them exactly side by side, my predictions were correct that the Gekkabijin is definitely better at distance casting. I'm not saying, I don't have enough water to really tell exactly how far. My camera operator said, was there a trout following? Distance is definitely, I don't want to say it's more controlled. It's hard to explain. So to get the maximum distance, I'll call it that, to get the maximum distance from the Silver Creek, the brake setting had to be kind of low, and you had to be a little bit softer with your presentation. But with the Gekkabijin, oh, right when I said that, that's when that happens. But with the Gekkabijin, you could definitely put a little bit more into the cast, and it feels like, and there's some wind that's coming as well. It feels like the wind, the control of the wind is better when you're doing those harder casts. Now, one restriction, I know I'll just kind of paraphrase myself a little bit. The Gekkabijin is not a very good short casting reel. So if you're looking to go for just straight up trout fishing, definitely go with the Silver Creek if you want one of these two reels. If you're looking for all-around performance, the Alpha's AIR TW is a pretty good all-around performer, but it does not have a clicking drag, which I thought was kind of a letdown for me, especially because clicking drags are not a new thing at all. Now I'll do some pitching just with this lure for now. I know I pitch with the Frog, but yeah, that feels nice. Where I'm most likely going to use the Gekkabijin in stock form is definitely going to be for bass fishing, maybe even some panfish jigs, open water. I can cast a little bit with a little bit more force. But I'm mostly going to probably use it for bass fishing. I do it in very finesse plastics, pitching around some cover, probably with the same braid. I'll probably put that on that Dobbins BFS rod that I used quite a bit last year. All right, so now I'll switch over to a jig. I think this is a 2-gram jig head with it's a skirt on there. Then it's just it's an off-brand, like small little shad profile. So what this is going to do is the adaptability of the brakes. I'm going to be testing all these same lures with the Gekkabijin, of course. So this is going to catch a lot of air resistance, and it's going to be a little bit different to cast than like a very dense minnow bait. So that's what's going to help out a little bit more there. And it is below freezing here, and I've had to clear ice off my guide, so that's another consideration as far as control and short range casting that most people probably won't have to deal with, but it does test the braking system out quite a bit. That's pretty good. I did not test the lure. It's pretty slippery. I did not test the lure like that with the Silver Creek when I did testing before. It definitely does not load up that well on this rod. Like if I force it, it does. So I will try this a little bit shorter range. What that's going to do is the rod's not going to help me out as much for these short range casts. So it's going to really put some stress on the reel to be able to compensate for the rod not really loading and flicking the lure out there. And I will turn my brakes down a little bit. I think I'll go over by this this brush over here and make sure that guides don't have ice. And I'm going to go over by this brush just to be able to I can have a little bit of target casting so I can really gauge my accuracy better than open water. And I did turn my brakes down to 3. Oh, wow. That made a very big difference, putting the brake dial from 3. I mean, from 4 down to 3. Okay. I mean, that feels really nice. All right, I'm going to turn the brakes up slightly. I'm going to turn them up to 5. I'm going to turn the brakes up slightly, turn them up to 5. I'm going to try a little bit longer casting to see how that goes with this. Very controlled. I felt a little bit choked off for distance. I thought I felt a bite at first. I'll turn it down to 4, but I'll use a little bit more gentle casting motion so I don't backlash. And I will say braided line is not a very good choice if it's below freezing because that line picks up so much water and freezes in your guides. Oh, that's good distance. I can't argue with that at all. I do feel it's restricted, especially with casting lures like a jig. It feels like there's a lot more potential. Like those very dense baits, like that Spearhead Ryuki that I was using. It was very, very flat casting, and it was a fast spool, but it was very controlled. I like it with that. With jigs, it doesn't feel quite the same. Oh, that is frozen. Okay. All right, so now I'll have that finesse jig on. It's gonna really, like I said, with the Silver Creek, the adaptability of the brakes, and with a little bit faster rod, it is gonna be different. Hopefully I can get that fish that I saw. All right, I will turn my brakes up to 4. Very controlled, a little bit over brake that I felt. Now I am going to do this a little bit more slow just because I saw that fish. The reason why I'm tapping my rod like that is to try to get some of that looser water off that braid's bringing in. All right, I will turn my brakes down to 3. It feels a lot better. I think the Gekkabijin with a little bit faster. So if you're going to use it for trout fishing, definitely have a more faster and the graphite rod will get you a little bit more force, so the braking system can work a little bit better. I generally don't like to do that in small streams, just because by the time you get that fast speed of the lure and the brakes working, you have to use your thumb to stop the lure right away, and it smashes into the water and creates a lot of disturbance for fish. But more open water like this, I mean, or if you fish deeper rivers, it's not a big issue. Yeah, I feel more comfortable casting a jig like this with the Gekkabijin. And this isn't really long range casting. It's probably about 80% of what the lure will probably cast. All right, I'm going to try, I'll keep on brake setting 3, and I'm going to try some, a little bit just more gentle cast. Actually, I'll go down by this bush to do that. All right. My thumb is getting pretty chilly too. Well, we'll probably do some backhand cast over there. I mean, that feels good. If I was finesse fishing for bass, or this reel is actually designed for saltwater fishing. That was the intent of Daiwa, for like a finesse saltwater reel. But kind of the same practice if you're using those smaller lures in open water. So that's why Daiwa has the braking system how they have it, is because in saltwater you're not casting to the short range cover like this most times. It's a little bit more open casting. A forehand. Has a very, very small backlash. It fixed itself by the time the lure went into the water. Okay. So mid-range casting, it feels like I have to like with the Silver Creek, it was more fluid to get that distance. Although the rod wasn't loading very well because it had to cast a little bit softer, I was still able to get that short to mid-range casting easier with the Silver Creek. With the Gekkabijin, it seems if I go too soft, I have to go really soft in order for the brakes not to turn on as much to get that distance, which then that kind of affects accuracy and rhythm of your casting if you have to cast that light. And then if I end up putting a little bit more force into it, I have to slow it down because the lure is traveling faster, then I have to slow it down. So that's just one thing. If you have to have a soft presentation into the water, that's a consideration of if you're going to be doing short range casting with the Gekkabijin or with the Silver Creek. Now, if you're doing short range casting like pitching to logs or docks, I would suggest the Gekkabijin, just because if you're going to be doing that with bass lures, they weigh a little bit more, and the rods are a little bit longer as well, and they're faster action, which will benefit the Gekkabijin's braking system. All right, so now I have that small frog on by Pepinka Lures. I'll put a link down below. I got this from Bait Finesse Empire, and they have a few other little micro frogs, but this is definitely the smallest. I'm actually kind of curious to see how this is going to have hookup percentage in the summertime. I got a long ways for that though. It'd be a good test for the brakes. Frogs can be easy to cast, but they're affected by wind. Like if they cast really good, and if the wind blows, it changes. So that's going to really show the adaptability of the brakes. There's more so this is going to be a test for the Gekkabijin. I know that the Silver Creek's going to handle it just fine. Gonna go into some more open water right now. This is brake setting 4. Like it feels like it would if you're casting like a 45 size frog with like normal like a normal frogging gear. No, that's even put a little bit more force into it, and I have it on brake setting 4, which is kind of my staple setting. That lure has nice action. That'd be cool if a big brown trout comes and crushes it. I mean, I don't think that's going to happen, but no, it floats pretty good even in the current. It's actually it's slow sinking, but if I'm sitting there, if I'm working that thing on top, I mean that's going to stay right in the strike zone the whole time. Especially if being so small, there's a spinner on there, but the body doesn't move that much if you just do a straight retrieve. So it's a very subtle action. That might actually be good for some brown trout, probably in the summertime. You know, when there's a lot of mice and small frogs and stuff like that. All right, I'm gonna do a couple more longer casts. I mean, that would be so fun fishing this small little frog for bluegill or crappie or something. I mean, a little bass would come up too. And even in the current, it does have some good action. It's not a lure review; it's a real review. Gotta remember that. It's my first time using this, so I got a little excited. Ooh, yikes. All right, I'm gonna turn the brakes down, I think. If I had a lighter rod, I think I'd be able to have that little bit higher brake setting. But seeing how ooh, got tangled up. There we go. But seeing how the rod isn't going to help me as much of the cast, I have to compensate by using a lower brake setting. I have a pretty good idea pitching with the Silver Creek. They just recently have done that with a variety of lures. But for the Gekkabijin, I am going to need a baseline with the Silver Creek. Well, I gotta turn the brakes down for sure on that. I'll turn it down to 1. I mean, it's good controlled. So if I was pitching some small jigs, If I was pitching some small jigs around docks for panfish, or even in settings like this, if I was waiting, I'd get a little bit closer to that brush and pitch. I could pitch some small jigs or like some egg imitations in there, and it would handle it just fine. See, I got a little higher going out deeper. Now I have that small frog on. Hopefully that brown trout comes up after this. That would be very fun. But I don't have high expectations as far as short range casting with this rod and this reel, but it will get some distance, I believe. I will break setting 4, and I'm going to cast that way. And it definitely hung that way when I was casting. I'll turn the brakes down to 3. It's still kind of hanging that way. A lot of times what happens is that if your rod isn't helping your cast very much, especially with lighter lures like this, it'll kind of hang a little bit to one side. So if you're backhanding, it'll almost have your lure follow through whatever side that your casting stroke is ending. It'll follow through that way a little bit too much. I mean, it casts out there really nice. There's no backlash. There's really no concern with those a little bit longer distances. So it's not really a matter of what reel can cast lighter, which I think they'll both be capable of the same. I think the Silver Creek would be a little bit better with the lighter lures just because of the braking system, and especially with short range. But if you're just trying to get maximum distance with very light lures, I think they'd be about the same. Then as you go up in weight, the Gekkabijin is just going to separate more and more with the distance. I'll turn my brakes down to 2. Oh, that was better than I expected. So the lure, it is a lightweight lure, but it's a fairly dense lure. So basically it casts the same as a frog for bass fishing. Just obviously everything is just smaller. But it does have the potential for long range castability. I mean, that's decent, especially if I took that little spinner that's on the bottom of that frog off, I bet this thing would float better. It's just like I did that with a different micro frog as well. If I took that little spinner off there, I think it would sit up a little bit more, and you can cast upstream and let that thing go underneath different brush piles and such. All right, so as you saw, there was a difference between the two reels. There was some overlap, of course, especially when you got to say like 4.5 grams with that spearhead. But for me, I feel kind of just putting it all together. If you're going to be doing short range casting, really no matter the lure, I would say the Silver Creek does have the advantage. Pitching was about the same with either reel. So say if you're going to be going out bass fishing and you do a little bit longer range with like a shaky head or a Nico rig or something like that, and then you also do some pitching, the Gekkabijin will be able to cover both just fine. But if you're doing that short range casting, I think if you have a little bit heavier lure on, let's say something that's I'd say 4 grams or heavier, you're gonna not really feel much of a difference between the two. But once you get into the short range stream casting, the Silver Creek does have the advantage. For me personally, I would either, for my type of fishing, if you watch this and you do a lot of stream trout fishing, either go Silver Creek, or if you go with the Gekkabijin, you can get that Roro AX24 spool that I use quite a bit. And that will give you all the short range casting capabilities that I like to do in streams. And then also you put the stock spool in, say with some braided line, or say heavier fluorocarbon, whatever you want to do. And then you can go out and you can bass fish or fish for panfish. That will obviously overall be a little bit more money, but that'll cover a lot more. That's just something that I would do. So if you like this, make sure you like this video and subscribe, and also comment down below what you're using for BFS gear. It's always interesting to see what people use, especially some of my longtime subscribers. Seems like their setups always change just like mine do. So I do appreciate those comments so that I can read what everybody else is doing.